This video is going to be a test of the Champion 7000 watt inverter generator, model number 100520. We got this unit after the freeze in Texas in 2021 to be our kind of stopgap generator between getting our standby generator installed, just so we had something. It is from the factory, gasoline only, but we added the Nash Fuel natural gas kit so that we can power it from natural gas, which we have at this house. I attached a 1/2-inch hose to the regulator. It's just the same kind of hose you would get from a grill or a heater or anything like that. I couldn't find anything online about if that was enough or not. Various people say it's not enough. Some people say it is enough, and I've never really tested it at full load. So in this video, I'm going to test two things. On gasoline, can the generator actually do 7,000 watts with no issue? And then second of all, can it do 7,000 watts on natural gas? Since this is gasoline only from the factory and I have added the regulator, I'm curious to see what is the limit. Usually tri-fuel generators or dual fuel generators have a lower rating for natural gas, and I'm not sure if that applies here or not, and no one can really seem to tell me. Champion came out with a higher power generator than this, and the engine size is the same. So that leads me to believe that this engine, which is a 420cc engine, is actually overpowered for 7,000 watts, which makes me wonder if even on natural gas, it can still supply 7,000 watts. And that would be a good test to have. If for some reason we ever use this, I want to know what I can power before I go, stall the engine out and cause a problem. There hasn't really been much modification done to this other than the natural gas kit. I've added a few small things like this switch, so I can switch between having the neutral bonded to ground and floating. If you plug it into an interlock like I have into the house, you would want it to be floating so that the neutral is only bonded in one place. That was a nice little modification. One of the receptacles I switched to a regular 20 amp receptacle, not GFCI. The reason being that running a UPS can sometimes trip a GFCI, so that makes those outlets useless for that purpose. Other than that, I added a fuel drain, which you can see up here, so that I can drain the fuel out of the tank. I do that about once every 6 months. I just rotate it out, and so far I've never had a problem. This unit has about 62 hours on it total. I have done the valves. They really didn't need much adjustment, but I just wanted to check anyway. It has a 15 W40 oil in it, which is actually a higher viscosity than what is specified in the manual. However, I've learned that running portable generators like this in a hot environment sometimes requires thicker oil, or you may end up with some issues. So I'm going to leave that in for this test. It's currently about 65 degrees, so we should not have any issues. Currently, the gas tank is full. We have some supplies on hand, some 200-watt space heaters, which are kind of difficult to find. These I bought to heat my fruit trees during cold weather. We lost a couple of citrus trees during the freeze, and I don't want to lose more, so I got these so I don't have to go and power a 1200-watt space heater under each tree if I need to. You can see the sticker on the bottom there. You can pause the video if you want to read it. One thing to note is when you first turn them on, they do use about 250 watts initially. So if you plan to turn on multiple using like a smart switch like I'm doing, you may want to stagger the startup using multiple smart switches I also have some 100-watt incandescent light bulbs in kind of makeshift holders. These are also for protecting trees and plants. A 100-watt light bulb does pretty well for that. Various cords so we can get everything plugged in. And then I have a 50-foot 10-gauge cord that I can plug into my interlock from the generator. In order to get all of the load, we will use the smaller items to get about 1,000 watts of load. And then I have a 6,000 watt, 240 volt heater in my garage that I got a good deal on. So this lets me select between 3,000 watts, 4,500 watts, and 6,000, as you can see there above the mode button. That should let us test and kind of get up to that 7,000 limit, but potentially, go lower if we need to see what it'll run on natural gas. That is wired up through the ceiling, and instead of going directly into the electrical panel, I actually bought a cheap manual transfer switch on Amazon. This is rated for 100 amps, but I would never use it for 100 amps. The build quality is not good, and the main thing to watch out for is you can actually move it to where it is not fully engaged. Like that position is somewhat connected, but not fully. That is fully engaged. So you could end up with a serious problem if you use this and didn't have it fully engaged. All of the more expensive models are sprung so that you cannot do that. I would never use this. So if you are planning on adding this to your house, I wouldn't use it for anything other than maybe 30 amps or something small like that, and make sure you know what you're doing. So the heater comes into this, and I can select between off, which it stays most of the time since we live in Texas where it's hot, or I can switch between utility and then generator inlet. The main feed from utility goes into this electrical panel right here, where I have the breaker in, and it is all connected. And then the generator side goes down through the wall and into the generator inlet that I have. I just cut the wire, put a Wago in, and split it. So when the generator interlock is plugged in, it is physically connected to both the breaker in my main panel, which lets me backfeed the house, and this inlet. That lets me use it for testing like this instead of having to have a whole separate setup or a cord into the heater. I'll now go around to the other side of the wall where you can see my main panel and the interlock, and I'll explain a little further. Here we are on the other side. You can see I have all my electrical set up on the outside of the garage here. Over to the right is my natural gas standby generator and my gas meter. So the reason for having this interlock is if the natural gas were to ever go out, I would have no power. So I can use the interlock to plug in a portable generator and still power my house. Or if the main generator were to just fail, I could still plug in this portable generator with natural gas and not have to worry about going to get gasoline. It would just be unlimited. This is a pretty nice inlet because you can close the cord while it's plugged in, and it's angled down so rain can never get to it. That goes behind the wall and then up to my main panel right here, which has the interlock and a 30 amp breaker. 30 amps is not very much, but if you're running a portable generator like that, it's usually going to be very big if it's over 30 amps, and I just don't want to store that, and I don't think it's likely that I'm ever going to need this. And if you're running on gasoline, it's going to get very, very expensive if you're actually pulling more than 30 amps continuous. I don't think anyone actually would want to do that for a long period of time. It just wouldn't make sense. You would have to be going to the gas station all the time. So now let me pause the video and I'll show you the natural gas setup. So we were just on the other side where the gas meter is, and you can see in the garage the pipe comes up the wall through the ceiling over to this other side. This is a 1 1/4 inch gas line. So it's not super big. And then over here, it tees off. I got this added in when I had some plumbing work done so I could use a natural gas grill. It tees off down into a 1 inch line that runs down the wall. And then on the other side of the wall, it actually drops even further down, and you can see it splits off. This is a 1/2 inch, and there is one side that has the quick connect for my natural gas grill, and then this other side has the quick connect that the generator can go on. I guess the third thing this would be testing is there enough gas flow here? Of course, doing it off the gas meter would be ideal, but I have not done that. It's something I probably plan to do, but it's just not very high on the list. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause the video and get the generator in place, get the cord plugged in, and we will start it up and see if we can get to 7,000 on gasoline. And if there's no issues with that, we'll give it a little break with no load, still running, and then switch to natural gas and try the same test and see what happens. Here we have everything plugged in. You can see I have the big 10 gauge cord plugged into the 240 receptacle that goes over to the interlock, to the inlet, with the interlock in the off position since I have that transfer switch. And then I have all of the devices plugged in and split between the two receptacles. So that means we get 500 watts on each side. So it should be a completely balanced load to make it completely fair. If we were to all plug it into one receptacle, we would probably overload the generator. There is no 30 amp breaker on this, but I don't know what parameters the inverter uses to decide if it's in overload or not. As you can see, we have the switch into floating. This is because the neutral and the ground is bonded on the other side of this cable, so we don't want it bonded in two places, so we can leave that on floating. So I'm going to get this powered up, and you will see the two incandescent lights that are plugged directly in will come on. I'll just leave those on as an indicator for it is still outputting power, and then we can slowly turn on the other devices. It's 200 watt per space heater and 100 watts per incandescent bulb. So let's get this starting. You want to put the choke on. Let's go ahead and turn the fuel on. And we'll just give that a moment so that the carburetor bowl can fill up. And that should be good. And make sure the eco is off. And we will leave eco off for this whole test since we're gonna try and go up to max load anyway. It should be at full RPM. And here you can see what I'm talking about with the fact that you can close this with the cord plugged in, which I think is a pretty useful feature. Hopefully you can still hear me. We'll let that kind of run for a moment and then turn on the space heater and see what happens. So now we'll go ahead and switch the transfer switch into the generator inlet position. And that's all the way down, so it's fully engaged. Now the space heater should be powered on, as we can see right there with the LED. So let's go ahead and turn it on. And that is 6,000 watts. We'll go ahead and turn the temperature all the way up since it is a little warm in here already. I can feel heat coming out, so I think the generator did a pretty good job at 6,000 watts all in one go. Let's go ahead and turn the lights on and see what happens. Hopefully you can hear me. We did have one light bulb not work, unfortunately, so that's 100 watts off, so we'll be at 6,900 watts instead, which is plenty enough for me. As you can see, it appears to be running without issue. The readout on the screen is showing 239 volts, which is perfect, and we don't seem to have any problems. We'll let this run for a few more minutes and see what happens. Generator was shaking quite a lot. The battery was shaking around since that's just on a rubber mount. I don't know if I would use this generator to supply 7,000 watts continuous. It is not a very expensive generator. It cost me under $1,000. I would most likely go for something a little more higher quality, like a Honda generator. The problem is a Honda EU 7000 IS is only rated for 5,500 watts continuous and costs almost $5,000, which is ridiculous. So I think this generator running at 5,500 watts, the max output of the Honda, would probably yield similar results, but for 5 times less the price. You could just buy a whole second generator and still be saving thousands of dollars. Now that we've had this running at 6,000 watts, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change the mode to 3,000 watts on this heater so that when we plug it in with the natural gas, we don't get the full 6,000 right off the bat, because I'm not 100% confident that we are actually going to be able to do that. So you probably heard the generator idle down a little bit more there. Now we're at 3,000 watts. The generator sounds a lot happier. Let's go see if it's shaking as much. I bet it isn't. Okay, so as you can see, the generator is a lot happier, and it's not shaking nearly as much as when it was at 7,000 watts. There was no overload light on with 7,000 watts, so it seems to be able to provide that with no issue. Let's go ahead and turn the heater off now. And you can hear the generator idle down a lot. When it was at 3,000 watts, I did try the eco mode. That made no difference, so I guess it still needs to be 100% throttle, 100% RPM speed to get that wattage. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the video now, and what I'll do is I will run the generator with the fuel in the off position to try and get any fuel out of the carburetor that we can, and then plug the natural gas in. Okay, we're back at the generator. I went ahead and drained the carburetor after it ran for a little bit. That's just using this 10 millimeter bolt right here. You take that out, all of the gas in the carburetor will run out. Just make sure the fuel is shut off or it will never end, of course. Here is the natural gas regulator. That is plugged in to the house, and the natural gas is on. This is obviously not an ideal setup. You would really ideally have this right off the gas meter to have the most amount of gas pressure. I think if this works, this will kind of prove that, you know, you don't need to have all of these crazy things in place. And if it doesn't work, maybe one day I will redo the test with a more optimal gas setup. We can verify this gas by hitting the release on the back of the regulator. That also pushes any air out of the line so that you can start the generator. I'm not sure if you can hear it or not. I just push that in until I can smell natural gas. You do want to use these regulators fairly often. I run my generator every 3 months, just for 15 minutes under a light load, just to make sure everything's operational and keep everything lubricated. And then I drain the carburetor and leave the tank completely full, and I've never had an issue. But for about a year, I did not use the natural gas regulator just because it's more work to get the hose out and get the generator in a position where I can plug it in. The last time I tested it, I actually could not get it to run. Something inside the regulator seemed to have gotten slightly stuck, but me continually pushing the release on the back seems to have gotten it back to where it functions. And I haven't had any problems with it since. I've tested it several times. If I had have needed that during a hurricane, that would not have been good. I would have to have messed around with it. I don't know what the fix is. I can't go to Home Depot and get tools or supplies. So I would highly suggest, if you have a tri-fuel generator, to run it both on gasoline so that you make sure that works, and on natural gas or propane to make sure that works. It's pretty useless having a generator for a storm where then it doesn't start. That defeats the entire purpose. So now we can start this up. We'll leave the choke in completely depressed. You don't need a choke when running on natural gas, so that is not needed, and it should fire right up. Okay, so currently the space heaters are off. Only 2 of the light bulbs are running, so that's a 200 watt load. I don't know if you can make it out, but the generator actually runs a lot smoother on natural gas. That is because when you install the tri-fuel kit, you have to tune there's an adjustment screw to tune the gas pressure. I spent a long time doing that, getting it just right. I assume the air-fuel mixture is now more balanced than out at the factory with gasoline, so it's just much smoother, as you can tell. Okay, so now we're going to turn the space heater on. The minimum load is 3,000 watts. We have 200 watts running, so initially you're going to be at 3,200 watts. Well, it actually jumped straight to 6,000, which I wasn't expecting. I quickly moved it back to 3,000, and we are now running at 3,000 watts. Let's go and look at the generator and see what we notice, if anything. generator is running without issue. The voltage is at 240 volts, which is not really a good test of anything since it's an inverter generator. The voltage is not coupled to the engine speed, but it is still obviously not struggling to do anything. So let's bump this up to 4,500 watts on the heater, which will be 4,500 plus 2, so 4,700 watts total, which is a pretty substantial load, which you likely won't see in your house apart from small peaks. Even running my 27 kilowatt natural gas generator and living my life as normal, usually the load is about 3 kilowatts or under, unless we're using a big appliance, turning the air conditioners on, etc. Okay, so now we are at 4,500 watts. The generator is still running. I can still feel heat coming out the heater with no issue. Let's go ahead and take a look at it, see if it's shaking uncontrollably or anything like that. Okay, so no problems that we can see. Let's go ahead and bump it up all the way to 6,000 watts. This will put 6,200 watts on the generator. Once we run it for a moment, I'll start to turn everything else on and see if we can get up to the maximum that I can test with, which is 6,900. Okay, I can hear the engine speed slowing, so I think we cannot sustain that. Yes. So the engine speed is slow, and the voltage has actually reduced. If we look at the display, I'm going to turn this off back to 4,500 watts, and I'm going to grab my kilowatt and we'll see what happens. So that's back up to 4,500. You can hear the engine speed went much higher. So our limit is somewhere between 4,700 or 4,500 and 6,000. Let me go get my kilowatt and we'll see what we see. Okay, so we are still running at 7,500 watts. I have the kilowatt plugged in. It is at 120 volts, which would be 240 volts, and 60 hertz without issue. So I'll show you that, and then we'll go ahead and bump up the heater to 6,000 watts, and we'll see what it shows. engine is definitely running slower than it should be. However, it is still maintaining 60 hertz. The voltage is definitely low, about 114, 113, but that is still usable. That is through through the receptacle on the front. So you may get some voltage loss across a long cord like I have plugged in, but everything was still working. So I put it back on 4500. Let's turn all of the extra devices we have, the 900 watts. That will bring us up to, that will be almost 1,000 watts extra, so near enough 5,500 watts, which is the maximum output of the Honda EU7000, if that's something you were considering. Of course, the Honda EU7000 IS, which is the current model, is fuel injected and much more difficult to convert to natural gas. So this might be a good test for anyone considering that model too. Okay, so that is close enough to 5,500 watts of load currently. The engine speed still sounds fine. I think it maybe did get slightly slower when we turned those smaller space heaters on, so the limit is obviously rapidly approaching. So probably between 55 to 5,600 watts really is the limit on natural gas, at least with this setup. I don't know if the limitation is simply the amount of fuel that regulator can provide and that engine can run on natural gas, or if it is a flow problem with the short hose or with my less than ideal natural gas run over to that area. So definitely in the future I'm gonna do a follow-up video. So let's go ahead and turn this all off now and I'll do a quick summary. Okay, so we finished that test and we saw that we could run at 5,400 watts with zero issues. 6,000 watts, we noticed the engine speed was significantly reduced. Even though it was keeping 60 hertz, it was just at a lower voltage. So I did the math and did some research, and gasoline engines running on natural gas, it seems to be widely agreed that a 20% power loss is the result. A 20% reduction of 7,000 is 5,600 watts, which is right between where we were seeing issues. So I don't think that the issue is the natural gas piping or the size of the pipe. I think it is just a limitation of how much natural gas you can fit into the cylinders of this engine. I don't think there's anything you could do to improve that. So this 1/2 inch pipe, I think we can call that good. This is about a 10-foot section, no problem. And obviously it goes into a 1/2 inch pipe, into a 1 inch pipe, then into a 3/4 inch pipe across the garage. It's a pretty long run with some bottlenecks in between with no issue. I don't think you need a 1 inch pipe directly to your natural gas meter for this. Clearly that isn't an issue. The other thing noted is running this at 7,000 watts, it was very loud and not very smooth running at all. I don't know if that would clear up as it heated up. I don't know if because I have 15 W40 oil in it, that is part of that problem. I don't think it is, because it is, as I'm saying this, it's 70 degrees outside. I think 15W40 at 70 degrees ambient temperature is going to be a reasonable viscosity. It's not like it's freezing. It calls for 10W30, so there's not that much of a difference with the viscosity. I don't know if I would run it at 7,000 watts, so I think this is probably a good candidate to transfer to natural gas just anyway. I would probably say that, between 5,500 and 6,000 watts is probably the most you want to run it anyway, and clearly you can do that on natural gas. So I think that was a pretty good test. If I ever do end up with a connection right off the gas meter, I will test it again. It would be a better solution to have it over there near the gas meter and near the inlet instead of having to use a 50-foot cord. But I think that's about it. If anybody else has one of these generators and wants to replicate the test, I'd be very interested to see if you get the same results, or if yours runs better than mine or worse than mine, how your natural gas install is done. I had quite a few people tell me that this curve was too tight. I don't believe that it is, and I think that because we just did this test, we can say it's not. This is the curve that people complain about. But I think that works pretty well. One kind of thought that I had is you can adjust the gas flow on with this screw right here. I don't think that will improve the situation. The first problem is it will mess up the idle. When you install one of these regulators, you need to make sure that it will run good at idle and at load. So if you get that out of whack, it won't idle well. So if you increase the flow, it's not going to idle, which obviously you would want. Like I said, during backing up your house, you're probably going to see various hours of very low load if you don't have AC running or any big appliances. So you have to have it idle. I think the main problem is just that natural gas just doesn't have the same energy density as gasoline, and when you fill up that cylinder with natural gas, it just doesn't have enough energy to produce that power. So pretty good test, I think. I'll definitely update if I find anything else out or do another test closer to the gas meter or with a bigger pipe. But I wouldn't hesitate to do this setup at all. Everything seems to work pretty well.